Yeah. What we have to do now is look at where we are today.
Exactly.
We're on the edge of the cliff, and we have got to start fixing it now. Otherwise, we're leaving a disaster to our children and grandchildren in the future. We could even lose our country if we don't get this fixed and straightened out. And now, nobody that's running really talks about it, about what we have to do and why we have to do it. They would prefer not to have it discussed.
Well, what's happening in this election, as you've seen, is that we're still coming out of a recession, and so both candidates, this president for 4 years, and both candidates in their campaign speeches are using the necessity to dig out from recession before they get to austerity. And you could argue that in Europe they've tried austerity before digging out from the recession, and that didn't do so much good in Europe. Do you need to?
Let me tell you in plain Texas
the recession first.
If I told you I don't want to dig out of my debt problem until I go broke, you'd say, "What are you talking about, bro?" And that's what you just said, but in very polished terms, recession. No, you're not going to pay your debt if you don't have the money. And if things are going downhill and you're running your debt up, you're making it next to impossible to pay your debt. And we've got to put the brakes on now and do this now and start and get it done. And it can be done if we in the House and Senate and the White House have the will. And certainly they should have the full support of the American people to get it done. And don't you think it's interesting that in all of these really tough times, we talked about all these big numbers, that the House, the Senate, and the White House don't reduce their salaries? Think about it.
You think they should?
Well, in a company, you'd have to, right? Sure you would. Everybody would. That never even comes up. No. I probably need a raise, right? But the point being, all the things they need to, if that's the condition of our country, and it is, then they need to set the first example of making the cutback for themselves.
Leading by example.
Exactly.
Is a fundamental principle, for, especially in business, which is where I spent most of my career. What do you spend all your career? We need more of that.
How close do you think we are to a crisis? Both of you, I'll ask you first. People say that this deficit and debt issue will get resolved by politicians when they absolutely have to resolve it, not when they should resolve it. Do you think that we're close to a market crisis? To people, for instance, to bond buyers perhaps not investing in United States debt? Is that going to happen one of these years?
Of course.
How close are we?
I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know that, but just common sense tells you. We're not talking about politicians now. We're talking about people taking money out of their pocket.
Right.
At one time, that was considered the safest investment you could make, as in a treasury bill or something, right? Mm-hmm. And now you've got every reason in the world to be concerned about will they be able to, is that going to last? How long will it last?
We're living in a dream world right now. I mean, most Americans don't understand. You used the word entitlement before. There is no such thing as entitlement. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court said that there's only two things that under the Constitution are guaranteed. Number one, military pensions. And number two, bondholders of U.S. debt. So the U.S. is not going to default on its sovereign debt. However, there's huge interest rate risk. And if you're a foreign investor, there's huge currency risk in investing in it. Now look what's happening right now. All the new debt in the last 2 years, it's been purchased by the Federal Reserve, has purchased about 70% of it. We're self-dealing in our own debt. We don't have market rates right now. We have artificially low rates because we're self-dealing in our own debt. China, Japan, OPEC nations, because they have positive trade balances and they got to do something with their money. But are they buying 30-year bonds? Heck no, because of the interest rate and the currency risk. They're buying short-term, which means we have historically low interest rates. We have the lowest average maturity in history, which means we haven't locked in these rates. And when the interest rates go up, and they will, for every 1% increase in interest rates, it's $160 billion a year in new spending, for which we get, as we say in the South, shinola, nothing. And right now we're 4 to 5% below, average interest rates, $640 to $800 billion a year for nothing.
So, but isn't it interesting that not more people talk about it on television, and certainly the candidates don't spend much time talking about this, and it's just like being in denial.
Well, we didn't go through the decade George W. Bush and so the
Yeah,
last 4
yeah.
years Barack Obama's decade. But what they've had to deal with, in fairness, right, is 9/11, couple of wars that require a lot of U.S. spending.
Right.
The tax cuts of George W. Bush, I'm not sure where you stood on those, but they did eat into our amount of money that we had to spend. And then the recession, which was, some say, close to a depression. Didn't that time period prevent us, all those things happening, prevent us from being able to make deficits and debt a top priority?
I don't know. It shouldn't have. You know, it could have, but it shouldn't have if people were thinking clearly, if they were well educated, if they even understood this whole debt thing, which they don't.
Right.
If you say what percent of the American people really understand all of this, I'd say it's a very low number. And now it should be everybody. And everybody should say, because this is my country. I mean, we can't do this. We've got to do this, this, and this. And people should be very active about not letting anything damage our country. Now, the one thing we have not mentioned at all, there is no question at all in my mind, if we keep going this way, some nation is going to head over here to take us. And boy, if they do, they pick the right time, right? Now, I wish every American would think about that all day, every day, and say, we can't let that happen. We've had the greatest country in the world. We've got to get it back there, and we've got to keep it there and make it better every year, not worse every year. That should be our goal. Every year we should look back and say, boy, things have really gotten a lot better. And even after they're ideal, you want to still make it better. Not just settle with what you have or not let it fly apart so you pay off all the people that helped you in your campaign.